Hi, this is Kelly. You're listening to the 13th episode of the Vote Her In series, a collaboration between Two Broads Talking Politics and author Rebecca Sive. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more, you can find all of the episodes in this series at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com/voteherin or in our regular Two Broads Talking Politics feed anywhere podcasts are found. Hi everyone, this is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics, and we're on today for an episode of our Vote Her In series, which we do in partnership with author Rebecca Sive. So I am here today, of course, with Rebecca. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi there, Kelly.
And joining us today is our guest. She is an Illinois state senator and the president of the National Conference of State Legislatures, Toi Hutchinson. Hello, Toi.
Hi, lady.
And good morning to you. Welcome, Toi. We're so glad you're here. And, you know, this episode is going to be broadcast right before your national meeting next month, I think, in Nashville.
Nashville,
Do I have that
Tennessee.
Right?
Yep,
Yeah.
Nashville, Tennessee.
So I know that's a place you know and love and a place you have thoughts about. And
I do. It's a beautiful place. Music City, USA. It's a wonderful place to have a conference. And it's also interesting because it looks like it's going to be the largest conference we've had in, about 5 or 6 years now. We represent about 7,383. Let me say, I said about, but then I gave you a very specific number. We represent 7,383 elected state legislators across the country, both Democrat and Republican, and about 25,000 legislative staff. And so that annual meeting, the numbers are just high. We're up to 25 hotels and they're almost all sold out now. So it's going to be a big thing. And my exciting thing is the opening day I get to introduce Dolly Parton. Incredible. I know. Dolly Parton.
That is so cool. Are you going to sing to her?
You know what? If I lean in that microphone and do my rendition of Jolene, I absolutely would. However, she's coming on behalf of her foundation. She has a wonderful foundation that gives books to children aged birth to 5, irrespective of the family's income. And she's trying to spread that amongst more states. So we get to have a good time with her Monday night at our opening plenary session. I'm really excited.
Oh, that's amazing. So tell us a little bit more about, we're focused here, as you well know, on women who are presidents and chief executives, and you are one of this amazing organization. And we thought it would be good for our listeners to hear more about this idea of or the reality of executive political power from someone who's worked really hard to get it, been both elected and appointed to such positions, and kind of share with people what you've learned and what you would advise other women who are following in your footsteps to seek to do.
Oh, that's a lofty question, Rebecca. I know. It's interesting because when I think about myself on this trajectory and the way I was when I came, and I've been in the Illinois State Senate now for 10 years. I turned 10 on January 5th. And I remember coming into the state capitol and knowing that while I was the senator in my district, I had to manage a whole different set of politics under the dome. And so I used to say, I know the politics at home and you need to master the politics under the dome. And I don't think I spoke that much in our caucus meetings when we were in the Capitol, just because I was trying to be respectful of leadership and seniority and the amount of time. It was in a very old school way to look at almost like waiting your turn. So I would do everything I did at home to be the leader that I knew I needed to be for my district. And then I was a lot more quiet in the Capitol in the beginning. And then it hit me. And I say this a lot, almost everywhere I go, and especially when I get a chance to talk to women audiences, that whatever the conversation is, if your voice isn't in it, the conversation is not complete. So you have to learn to trust your voice. We have to learn to not second guess ourselves and the contributions that we make. And we've all had these experiences where we say something and then a man in the room says it again and everyone goes, yeah, that's really good. And I'm like, yeah, that's what I said 10 minutes ago. You know, I've seen it over and over again with multiple women at all different levels of the power structure. And I've learned to handle it with grace, but also with a little bit of grit. Like I have something to say and I'm a part of this discussion. And I'm going to stay here and keep contributing as much as I can, as long as I'm supposed to be in here. And that is a sometimes difficult thing for women who've been socialized to A, not make waves, B, don't make anybody feel uncomfortable, and C, don't brag. You know, it's hard to sometimes manage those things. And so I tell my daughter all the time, there's nothing bragging about telling the truth. If you have something to say what you have to say, use your truth. There's nothing bragging about that. So let's put that down right there. So when I tell people who are coming up and kind of rising through the ranks, the best thing and the first thing that you ought to do is trust your voice. You're there for a reason. You are there for a reason, and it's okay to own it.
So as they're trusting their voice and realizing that they really are there for a reason, are there sort of specific strategic or tactical pointers to move toward leadership? I know you must have thought about this and executed some of them on your way to being the head of the national conference, for instance.
You know, that is, and I sometimes wonder, I remember participating in the Women in Power class at the Harvard Kennedy School in 2004, and we had a breakout session about that topic in specifically. What are the different things that women do in leadership positions that are just different than men sometimes? And there's a lot of research on that. We tend to be a lot more collaborative. We tend to listen and want to team build as more than plow through. Now, sometimes those things can be put in the stereotypical box. I can think of examples of men that I've worked with that are very collaborative and do know how to build camaraderie and try to build teamwork in those ways. And then we've seen the stereotypical ways that folks don't. And I think we have one in the White House right now. So I tend to think about always knowing the rules of engagement as deeply as I can before I begin. So one of the first pieces of advice I got when I first became a state senator was be a tactician. No rules of procedure. Because sometimes you can be right all day long and still be outmaneuvered procedurally.
Right.
So be a tactician. And sometimes the best leaders, the best in whatever industry you are the people who know the rules of engagement and then use those to get their point across. It's not always the easiest thing to do because there are times when you want to plow right through and say exactly what you have to say and sometimes blow things up, and there's a place for that. And then there's a place of knowing when it's not time to do that. That subtle diplomacy and those soft skills really do come in handy. So I'm not afraid to use either one of them. But the first thing I do is concentrate on being a tactician in the best way I know how.
So tell us how you decide, well, gee, I have to confront, so to speak. I have to blow up, so to speak, and just plow forward and distinguish myself and my view and my power that I have here.
Yeah, that comes down to, and lots of times when you're in room, like say you're at a conference table and there's multiple people at a conference table. And the example I gave earlier about how you might say something and then there's a little bit of conversation and someone restates what you said and then all of a sudden everybody hears it. Or a common occurrence is in the middle of conversations being overtalked. And when I talk to women as they're growing and learning in this, is to do not be afraid to say, hold on, allow me to finish my point firmly and decisively. And we all know how sometimes that's received, but it's okay. And you can't be afraid of that. To say very firmly and definitively, hold on, allow me to finish my point. Means you are going to use your voice. You are going to be in this conversation. You're not going to be overtalked. You have something to contribute. That was a skill set that I had to learn to do because sometimes I would fall back. And before you know it, the conversation's over and you haven't gotten out what it is you need to say. Yeah. So, and then there are those times when you have to do it in a way where it is forceful. And I live in that intersection of race and gender, where sometimes it's not received very well because I'm a woman, and sometimes it's not received very well because I'm African American. There's the angry Black woman trope. There's the whole thing where we are constantly trying to modulate who we are so that we're comfortable to the people receiving us. And I no longer try to do that. I just have decided in my life that I no longer try to do that. And maybe that is also because I'm over 40 now too. My mom says it all the time. Like the minute she turned 40, she's like, I got something to say.
I had to wait till I was 60 before I heard that.
Like my grandmother is amazing. She, at 89, she'll tell you in a heartbeat at 89, I'm 89. I can say what I want to say. And I think that level of confidence, we shouldn't have to wait that long for. Like those are skill sets we need to teach young girls as they're growing up in leadership roles early. And there's subtle things. There's subtle things that happen when you're in school. Like I remember having a conversation with my daughter at school about dress code and how girls were penalized for how they dressed, but we were never teaching boys how to just concentrate. Or later when we become adults and work in policy movements about sexual assault and sexual harassment, and we're constantly teaching women how to be safe and how to not put yourself in situations where danger or violence can happen to you, or when someone can misconstrue or take advantage of you in that situation, instead of teaching men not to do that.
Right.
So there are a lot of things that fall on us in ways that I think are absolutely not fair, but that we're growing out of and talking through now in the space that we're in now as women begin to take their positions at the table, and not as note takers and not as people who are just observing, but as participants and leaders and thought-provoking women that are there to change and direct a conversation. That is what is exciting to me now. And I can just see in my own life the transition and the trajectory, and watch it happening in my daughter and the young women that I hope to mentor. And then every time I get to meet a new woman that comes into the legislature, I try to be there not only as a sounding board and a hug when you need it, but to give you encouragement to say, you got this, you can do this, and you're supposed to be here.
So one of the things that happens as more women get into power and get into these positions is that women's issues, women's causes can kind of come to the front. And in this most recent legislative session in Illinois, there were a lot of progressive causes that were passed through, but one of them was the Reproductive Health Act. And I remember watching the floor speeches, and you gave just a beautiful speech about the importance of choice or lack of choice for your grandmother and your mother and you and then your daughter, and and really pulled that together. Can you talk about sort of what it means to be personal and emotional when you are being a leader, and the ways that you can sort of use that as a power to help get legislation that's important passed?
That's a good question. I think in that moment, I had written that article, and it was published about a year before we got to that place on the Senate floor for the Reproductive Health Act. And one of the things that I wanted to do for myself personally was put my family's story in the record. Because when we talk about reproductive health across the board, that it is so much bigger than whether or not I want to have a baby. That is a significant part of it. But it's also about if I do. It's also about how I manage the roles of mother and a person who's swimming through this economic stream. And I wanted to point out that the history of this country is inclusive of women of color that have experienced it differently. And I wanted to be really clear, but I wanted to do it in a way that would allow people the space to listen with their heart, as much as our ideological differences tend to pull us apart. So I have found that when I'm in those situations, and that's why I chose to refer to my family members the way that I did on the floor that night, I said, I talked about the history of my grandmother in the 60s in the Bible Belt, and that impact on my mother as she was growing up also in Nashville, Tennessee, and then how that made her teach me and how that makes me teach my daughter about all of these issues. And I referred to each woman in each decade by the name that she would have been called by, because I wanted to also put into the record that this is a trajectory that I don't want to go backwards on. That I referred to my grandmother as the colored woman in that hospital room, and my mother as the young Negro college student, and myself as a growing Black woman in college, and my daughter as a young, empowered African-American woman, because even what we were called in this country has changed and evolved over time. And I didn't want to leave that conversation without putting words around that space for a family that looked like mine directly to people who I knew don't agree with me at all about where my position is. But I gave it to them in a way that would be very, very difficult for you to respond in anger or with division or with hate, because I talked about what it means really to have the power to say yes, as well as the power to say no. And when I take those personal moments, those things that are dearest to me, and I allow them to be put in the narrative, I think it does open up a door to use my experience and my historical narrative not as a weapon and not as a bludgeon, but as an invitation to understand why I think what I think. And I think that that is something that's missing in the body politic right now. We are so busy screaming at each other that nobody's talking to each other. And as a result, we're more polarized than ever.
So on this reproductive rights front and telling the personal story, one of the things that I know we've talked about among ourselves here at the show, and Kelly and I have wondered about, is, and been so pleased about, is the forthright nature of the Democratic women presidential candidates' discussion about reproductive rights and keeping abortion safe and legal. And of course, they range, three, of the major candidates, one is African American, three are white, but they come from vastly different, personal backgrounds, to your point about the importance of that. And I'm wondering what you take away from the notion that we're now in the place where this discussion is being held on a regular basis in a presidential forum, so to speak.
I'm grateful that it's being held in a regular thing. I think it's an acknowledgement of the fact that we have stories untold still. So we know that 1 out of every 4 women will experience abortion in her life. The reason there's so much shame still attached to this is because we still don't talk about it. We still do not talk about it. And even the people who are brave enough to talk about it recognize that there are only certain conditions that folks feel are acceptable to talk about in terms of terminating a pregnancy or choosing that that's not what you want for your life right now. The fact that we have women running at the highest level of our politics means we can then demand that our stories be told.
Right.
And our stories being told is powerful in and of itself. Very difficult, very, very difficult to fight for who you do not know or to protect who you don't see. I tell people a lot, you can't fight for me if you don't know me. And you can't know me if you don't hear me. And there's so much power in the need and the necessity of people to be seen. Otherwise, we're not a part of any of the solutions. So the fact that those women are there and they're telling their own personal stories and they're giving space for women to talk about ours and spread that amongst body politics is a very, very powerful thing. It's a very powerful thing because it allows us to be seen.
So related to that, I know, Kelly, you've been talking to a lot of different types of women and other sorts of organizers about how you put a campaign together. Are there thoughts related to that to ask Toi on this issue of both sharing your personal story and moving ahead with a campaign that you want to ask and share?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we think about is, first of all, who runs for office, who even thinks about running for office, what do you do? I know the first time you ran for office, you lost, how do you pick up and move on from there? And is that different for women? And so maybe if you could speak to that a little bit about how you sort of keep moving forward women, of course, have so many other things going on in their lives so often, but how you keep that as a focus and wanting to do this really important work.
I am very stubborn. I am very stubborn. And I think that's, my mom and my dad would tell you that's a pretty inherited trait. I think there are a million and one reasons for why I've always felt in my heart and in my gut that I can't stop. That I have to keep going. When I tell people the story of how I got to the Senate, how I got my law degree, and I made a conscious decision because early on I struggled in law school, and I struggled in law school while I was in the Senate. I graduated from law school at 41 with 3 kids, and I'd done it with 3 campaigns and raising 3 children. And people looked at me all the time like I was insane. But I knew that at that moment when I graduated from law school, I was the only woman sitting in the Senate that had any legal training elected. Everybody thought that the majority of the legislature is all women. At that time, we weren't. I was the only one. We got a couple since then. And now we have a new Senator Jackie Collins, who's now decided to go to law school herself. And I knew that understanding and being able to articulate and debate and challenge the law was a powerful thing, and I was attracted to that. But I also knew that my entire career I had spent doing it for everybody else, and that law degree was mine, and they were not going to take that away. I was going to do everything I could to finish that law degree. I didn't want my children to see me quit. I didn't want my constituents to see me quit. And I also wanted to tell the story afterwards, because most times when I tell people, yeah, I'm Toi Hutchinson and I have a law degree and I did it while I was in the Senate, and everybody stands up and claps and applauds, but they don't know how hard it was, how many times I wanted to quit, how many times people told me I probably should quit, when the school said I was dismissed, when I fought to get back in, when I got back in, then when I got the law degree, all of those things that happened in the middle of some of the most contentious times in Illinois state politics while I was raising a family. And I look back on it now thinking, I don't even know how I did that. But I do know that when you are in that position, and I know women that are wired like me live by this code of kind of grace and grit. You just do what you have to do. I do the best I can today because I know my tomorrows will take care of themselves if I do the best I can today. And I try to let folks know that to remember to do self-care, to remember to that standing on your principles doesn't necessarily mean that when you compromise, you've given up anything. It means you can argue, you can debate, you can try to move the ball forward. Your very presence is doing that. But the one thing that'll make sure that nothing ever moves forward is if you stop. If you decide that this is too hard, or if you decide, I don't think I can do this anymore. If you get to that moment, those are the times you regroup, you sit back, and you go, you know what? When you get in the car and your GPS thing comes on and you hit a bit of construction, that little voice says, recalculating. Give yourself some time to recalculate, but don't stop. Just don't stop. So it is looking back at my own life and my own experiences is still teaching me things to this day. Because while I was in the midst of it, all I was thinking was, I got to get through today, or I got to get through this month, or I had to get through to petitions, or I have to get through to committee, or I have to get through to when this bill gets signed. And now I just need to get the governor to sign it. And at the same time, I need to get my kids out of 8th grade, and I need to get my son out of high school, and I need to figure out what college they're going to go to, and I need to figure out how I'm going to pay these student loans, and I need to figure all of those things that can distract you from staying on course and not taking your eyes off the prize, because there's always going to be something. There's always going to be an interruption. There's always going to be a challenge. There's always going to be somebody that tries to tell you that this is not for you. There's always going to be that. So the goal is to stay true to yourself, give yourself time and space to recalculate when you need to, and know that the only way to ensure that it's not going to happen is if you stop working. So that's not an option.
You're giving me chills.
Yeah.
I mean, this whole notion of grit and grace and everything that comes with it, I want to thank you, Toi, for sharing, because as we mentioned at the outset, we're sort of going into what some people call, the dog days of August. But for sure, there's just going to be a lot out there for all these women who are seeking to run and seeking to lead. And hopefully they'll hear what you have to say and take it to heart. So thank you so much.
Well, you know what? Thank you for saying that. And let me also give a shout out to the first time I heard the phrase grit and grace from Cheryl Jackson. Cheryl Jackson used to be the president of the Chicago Urban League and then decided to run for Senate. And now she's doing women's gatherings all over the place. And one of the things she says all the time is she talks about grit and grace. And she talks about that thing. And she's invited women to talk about what that means for themselves. And that's where I get that from. So shout out to Cheryl Jackson for giving me a wonderful phrase like that. And I normally say to people, because I'm so grateful that I've been able to pick up relationships and people and women in my lives that have given me so many amazing jewels that I get to build on. But that when someone tells me something fantastic, the first time I give them credit. And the second time I say somebody said, and the third time that's mine. Shout out to Cheryl.
Well, feel free to say vote her in anytime.
Yes, vote her in. I'm telling you, it's when we are strong enough to share with each other that we all grow. My girlfriend just sent me a beautiful meme today, and it says, "Real queens fix each other's crowns."
Kelly, any parting thoughts or words?
Well, I think everyone should just take that inspiration as, anytime you're struggling in your own life, especially thinking about running for office, to push forward and we should all make sure that we are there, that we are in the arena. So, Toi, that's really beautiful. And I'm so glad that you shared that with us. And I think everyone should really take that as an inspiration.
I'm so happy that you guys asked me to be here. Thank you, ladies. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. And I'm just so happy that now I get to add you to my arsenal in my life. I'm so glad. Thanks, Rebecca.
All right. You're very welcome.
The Vote Her In segment is a collaboration of Two Broads Talking Politics and author Rebecca Sive. Our theme song is called Are You Listening off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at Two Broads Talk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.